James Adams had it all: power, money, influence. A ruthless man who saw the world as a game where only the strongest survived. Feelings, weakness, people, disposable pieces. But that night, fate decided it was time to change the rules. The sports car tore down the empty road, headlights cutting through the darkness. James gripped the steering wheel tightly, his thoughts racing. The phone vibrated on the dashboard. "James, listen." The voice on the other end was urgent. "You need to come back now. Something's wrong, I found." "Not now," he interrupted, impatient. "I'm already on my way." Before he could react, something in the rearview mirror made his heart pound. Headlights were approaching at high speed. A second later, the impact hit like thunder. The car spun, tires screeched against the asphalt, glass shattered. The last sound he heard before everything went dark was the echo of fate pulling him into a path with no return. Get ready. This story of new beginnings, secrets, and an unexpected love will touch your heart. Leave a like on this video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more emotional stories. The sunrise painted the sky in golden hues when a body, among the twisted wreckage of the overturned car, showed signs of life. James opened his eyes with difficulty, feeling pain pulsate through every fiber of his body. His head pounded and his blurry vision revealed little about where he was. He tried to move, but his legs failed him. His breathing was ragged, and the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. He couldn't tell how much time had passed or where he was, but one thing was certain: he was alone. Disoriented, James started walking. At first, he moved purely on instinct, with no clear destination. He crossed vast fields, wandered through small towns where he scavenged leftover food from markets, slept in plazas or under awnings, braving the cold nights. With no documents, no identity, he was just a shadow drifting through the world. Time lost meaning. Days turned into weeks, and he kept walking, driven only by the need to survive. Until, without realizing it, his steps led him to a distant village, where his fate would finally begin to change. Tessa was in the backyard holding a basket of freshly picked fruit when something in the distance caught her attention. A figure was moving between the trees, unsteady, as if about to collapse at any moment. Her heart pounded. It wasn't common to see strangers around there. When the man finally emerged from the vegetation, she held her breath. He was no longer wounded, but his body bore visible scars, and the dirt clinging to his skin and clothes revealed weeks of hardship. His deep, exhausted eyes reflected desperate confusion, as if he had forgotten even who he was. "Oh my God," Tessa murmured, dropping the basket. "What happened to you?" The man tried to respond, but his strength gave out. His body collapsed, and before he could hit the ground, Tessa ran to catch him. Little did she know this stranger carried secrets that would change her life forever. Tessa barely had time to react before the man collapsed in front of her. His weight made her stagger, but instinctively she grabbed him by the shoulders, trying to keep him from hitting the hard-packed dirt too harshly. "Hey, hold on," she said, her heart pounding. The stranger didn't respond. His body was warm, his breathing irregular, as if he were at the brink of exhaustion. Up close, Tessa could see his condition more clearly. His unkempt beard, dirty hair, and half-closed eyes revealed weeks of suffering. His clothes, which might have once been expensive, were now nothing more than tattered rags. "Grandma," she called out, not taking her eyes off him. "Come quickly." From inside the house, Grandma Alice appeared, leaning on her cane. Her wise eyes took in the scene, and within seconds, she understood the essentials. "Help me bring him inside," she ordered firmly. With effort, Tessa slung the man's arm over her shoulders, and with her grandmother's help, dragged him into the house. The house was modest but cozy. The scent of dried herbs lingered in the air, mixed with the warm aroma of freshly baked bread. Tessa and Grandma Alice laid the stranger down on the small bed in the corner of the room where he mumbled something unintelligible before slipping into a deep sleep. Tessa watched him for a moment. Who was this man? What was he doing alone, wandering like a lost specter? "He doesn't seem injured, just exhausted," she observed, wiping his face with a damp cloth. "And malnourished," Grandma Alice added. This man has been starving. Tessa sighed. There was something about him that intrigued her, an air of mystery, as if he carried a forgotten past. "What should we do, Grandma?" she asked. Grandma Alice adjusted the shawl over her shoulders and answered with the wisdom of someone who had seen much in life. "We wait. When he wakes up, we'll know who he is and what to do. But until then, we need to be cautious. Call your cousin Daniel to stay here tonight. We don't know what kind of story this man carries, and we need to be prepared for anything." The scent of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the house as James opened his eyes. The ceiling above him looked unfamiliar, and the bed he lay on was too small for his body. He felt a strange weight on his chest, not physical but something pressing down on him, a restlessness he couldn't quite name. He sat up slowly. Every muscle ached, but not as before. The wounds had healed, leaving only scattered scars across his body. His overgrown beard and disheveled hair gave him the look of someone who had been far from the civilized world for a long time. But how long? That was the question that tormented him. The sound of footsteps on the wooden floor made his heart race. He looked around and saw a woman standing in the doorway, watching him cautiously. Her brown eyes were curious, but not hostile. "You're finally awake," Tessa said, crossing her arms. "You've been in my house since yesterday. About time you showed some signs of life." Daniel, Tessa's cousin, appeared at the door with a half smile, folding his arms. "Took long enough, Tessa. I thought this guy was going to sleep forever." James blinked a few times, trying to piece his thoughts together. "I've been here since yesterday?" It seemed impossible. Where am I?" His voice came out hoarse as if he hadn't spoken in weeks. "In the village of Saint Amelia," Tessa replied, watching him closely for any reaction. "I found you passed out near the road. You were a mess." James ran his hands over his face as if that would help him remember, but his mind remained a blur. "And who are you?" he asked, trying to at least understand his situation. "Tessa," she said simply. "And that lady over there is my grandmother, Grandma Alice. And this is Daniel, my cousin." He followed her gaze and saw the elderly woman sitting at the table, stirring a spoon inside a cup. There was something in her eyes that made him feel like she already knew all the answers he was searching for. "And you?" Tessa asked, leaning slightly forward. "Who are you?" Silence filled the room. James opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He didn't know. Tessa and Grandma Alice exchanged discreet glances. He didn't remember anything. "No name?" Tessa pressed, her voice now softer. James tried. He forced himself to dig through his mind for something, anything, but it was like searching for a lost object in a sea of fog. He simply shook his head, frustrated. Grandma Alice sighed and stood up, walking toward him with a plate of warm bread and a cup of coffee. "First things first, eat," she said, placing the food in front of him. "Nothing gets solved on an empty stomach." James looked at the plate. His body knew it was starving, but his mind was still battling the confusion. Tessa pulled out a chair and sat at the table, watching him. Something about this man intrigued her. The way he looked around, the tension in his shoulders, as if he was used to a world completely different from this one. "If you don't remember who you are," she said, breaking the silence, "then maybe it's time for a fresh start. We'll help you." Tessa headed toward the small town's police station, determined to find out if anyone was looking for a missing man. When she arrived, she found Sheriff Williams, a middle-aged man with a rigid posture but a keen eye. "A missing man?" he repeated, flipping through an old record book. "We haven't received any reports like that around here. No families, no alerts from neighboring towns. If someone's looking for him, they haven't searched this way." Tessa sighed, crossing her arms. Part of her had expected this answer, but hearing it out loud made it feel more real. "So he's completely alone," she murmured. The sheriff closed the book and looked at her with renewed interest. "I'd like to stop by your house and talk to this guest of yours. Maybe a conversation will help us figure something out about him." By late afternoon, Sheriff Williams arrived at Tessa's house. James, who had been sitting at the table, stood up when he saw the uniformed man before him. "Good afternoon," the sheriff said, extending his hand. "I hear we have a new temporary resident in town. How are you feeling?" James hesitated before answering. The exhaustion was still there, but what bothered him most was the strange emptiness inside. "Lost," he admitted. I don't know who I am." The sheriff studied him for a moment before pulling a notepad from his pocket. "No documents, no memories, no one looking for you. I think we'll need a temporary name." He tapped the tip of his pencil against the paper and gave a small smile. "How about Austin? That way it'll be easier for us to refer to you while we figure out your identity." James, or rather Austin, stared at the sheriff. A new name? A new beginning? He nodded slowly, still getting used to the idea. "Austin," he repeated quietly. "I guess I can live with that for now." Morning in St. Amelia started early. The sun had barely risen on the horizon when Tessa found Austin sitting on the porch, watching the village come to life. He seemed absorbed, lost in thoughts he couldn't quite organize. "You're up early," she remarked, sitting beside him with 2 cups of coffee. Austin took the one she offered, warming his hands against the porcelain. "I barely slept," he admitted. "Everything still feels unreal, like I'm trapped in a dream I can't wake up from." Tessa watched him for a moment. Even without his memory, there was something about him that didn't quite fit in this village. The way he analyzed everything around him, his posture. He didn't seem like an ordinary man. He seemed like someone used to being in control, making quick decisions. But now, without his memories, he was vulnerable. "Well, if you're feeling up to it, you can come with me today," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "I could use some help at the grocery store, and you need to start getting used to life around here." Austin nodded. Maybe keeping busy would help ease the weight of the emptiness in his mind. The grocery store was just a few minutes from the house, a small shop that supplied the village with the essentials. Tessa unlocked the door and grabbed the apron she usually wore, tossing another one to him. "Let's see if you have a knack for this," she joked. Austin put on the apron without protest. Throughout the morning, he tried to familiarize himself with the place, helping Tessa organize the products and serve the few customers who walked in. But something felt strange. The work was simple, yet he had a sharp intuition for numbers and organization. Before long, he noticed that some items were misplaced and that there was a small discrepancy in the inventory records. "Tessa," he called, pointing at the logs. "These numbers don't match. Are you sure no one took anything without logging it?" Tessa frowned and looked at the notebook. Sure enough, there was a difference between what was recorded and what was actually in stock. "How did you notice that so fast?" she asked, surprised. Austin shrugged. "I don't know. It just makes sense to me." Tessa narrowed her eyes, just as she thought. He might not remember who he was, but his essence was still there, and she suspected this man wasn't just anybody. Before she could respond, the grocery store door swung open, and Daniel rushed in. "Tessa, Sheriff Williams wants to talk to Austin again. Looks like he got a call about a missing person." Silence fell between them. Tessa and Austin exchanged glances. Was this finally a clue about his past, or just another mystery waiting to be solved? The atmosphere at the St. Amelia Sheriff's Office was usually calm, but that day, Sheriff Williams was restless. The phone call he had received earlier left him with an unsettling feeling. When Tessa and Austin arrived, he greeted them with a watchful look. "I got a report about a missing man who partially matches your description, Austin," Williams said, flipping through his notes. "But there's one important detail. This man has a tattoo on his right shoulder." Austin rolled up his sleeve, revealing clean skin. "Nothing here," he replied, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. Williams closed his notebook and sighed. "That means it's probably not you. But what worries me is the fact that no one has reported you missing. Either you don't have anyone waiting for you, or the people who should be looking for you can't, or don't want to." Those words hit Austin hard. What if he was truly alone in the world? Sensing his distress, Tessa placed a hand on his in a silent gesture of support. The sheriff continued, "Still, I want to file your case. If someone comes looking for you, we'll at least have a starting point." Austin nodded and picked up the pen to sign the document. The moment he traced his signature, an odd sense of familiarity struck him. The motion was automatic, fluid, as if he had done it countless times before. Tessa noticed his confused expression. "What is it?" she asked. "I don't know," Austin murmured. "But I have the feeling I've signed a lot of important papers before." Williams narrowed his eyes, intrigued. "Maybe you worked in business, law, something big," he suggested. Austin took a deep breath. He couldn't remember his past life, but something told him it was far from simple. Tessa felt a chill run through her. She had always known he wasn't an ordinary man. The only question left was, who was he really? Time passed. What had once been uncertain days turned into weeks. St. Amelia, with its quiet routines and simple residents, no longer felt like a strange place to Austin. On the contrary, he was beginning to feel like he belonged to the village in some way. Mornings were marked by the scent of fresh coffee and baked bread in Grandma Alice's house. The clinking of dishes, the soft conversations, and the occasional laughter were a new kind of melody to Austin, something he hadn't known he needed but now felt essential. At the grocery store, he had come to recognize the regular customers, knew what each person usually bought, and even found himself anticipating orders before they were placed. His sharp eye for details had helped Tessa organize inventory more efficiently, prevent waste, and even balance the books. The job, simple for anyone else, was a satisfying challenge for him. Different from anything he had done before, or maybe not so different after all. Tessa noticed the changes. At first, Austin had seemed like a fish out of water, lost among shelves of food and conversations about seasonal harvests. Now, he walked through the village greeting people by name, helped the elderly carry their bags, and had even fixed Grandma Alice's fence without being asked. One afternoon, as they closed the grocery store, Tessa looked at him and smiled. "You've changed," she remarked, crossing her arms. Austin raised an eyebrow as he finished stacking a few boxes. "Changed how?" he asked, pretending to be indifferent but secretly curious about her answer. "Before, it seemed like you were always waiting for something. Like at any moment someone would show up and take you back to wherever you came from. Now, you seem lighter, more present." She shrugged. "Seems like you actually like it here." Austin was silent for a moment. He did like it. He liked the smell of bread in the morning, the quiet nights under a sky full of stars, the sound of rain tapping against the roof. And most of all, he liked being around Tessa. She was different from any woman he imagined he had ever known. Simple, yet strikingly honest. She said what she thought, no pretense, no hidden motives. Her smile wasn't calculated, it was genuine. Being around her was easy, natural. "I guess I'm getting used to it," he finally admitted. Tessa chuckled softly, grabbing her bag. "Then we've got a problem, Austin. Because once you get used to this, it's hard to want to leave." He watched as she walked away, his heart feeling just a little heavier than it should. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to remember the past. Maybe, just maybe, this simple life was all he had ever needed. The weeks passed, and Austin felt more and more like a part of St. Amelia. The uncertainty about his past no longer haunted him as much. But peace never lasts forever. That afternoon, while helping Daniel unload sacks of flour, a chill ran down his spine. When he looked toward the road, he saw a black car parked in the distance. Vehicles like that were rare in the village, and something about it felt off. Tessa noticed his tension. "Something wrong?" she asked. "I don't know," he replied, not taking his eyes off the car. The driver stepped out, tall, dressed in a dark suit, with an unreadable expression. He walked through the village as if searching for someone. Before Austin could react, the man entered the grocery store. "Good afternoon, can I help you?" Tessa stepped forward. The stranger pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and revealed a photograph. It was James. Austin's heart pounded. He stared at the image of a man who was supposed to be him, yet felt like a stranger. Then, the man looked directly into his eyes. "Have you seen this man?" Silence filled the room. Tessa held her breath. The truth could come out right then and there. Austin looked at the photo once more and made his choice. Time seemed to stand still. The stranger remained there, holding up the photo of James, or rather, the man Austin had once been. The air around them grew heavy, as if every second carried the weight of a truth about to be revealed. Tessa's heart pounded. She looked at Austin, waiting for him to say something, to make a move. But he stayed still, staring at his own image on the paper as if he were looking at a ghost. The stranger raised an eyebrow, impatient. "Well?" he pressed, his gaze locked onto Austin. "Have you seen this man?" Austin blinked, his mind racing in different directions. He could tell the truth. He could admit that he didn't remember anything, but that the face in the picture was his. He could ask for help in finding out who he was, but something inside him refused to do that. Because deep down he knew, if he accepted the past, his life in this village, his quiet routine, Tessa, all of it could disappear. He took a deep breath and let the air out slowly. "No," he finally said, his voice steady but calm. "I've never seen this man before." Tessa held her breath. Daniel, who had been watching from a distance, widened his eyes. The stranger kept his gaze fixed on Austin, studying every feature of his face, every tiny movement that might give away a lie. "Are you sure?" he asked, slowly folding the paper. "He looks a lot like you." Austin shrugged, keeping his expression neutral. "Coincidence, maybe." The man was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing the response. Then, he slipped the photo back into his suit pocket and forced a smile. "All right, I appreciate your time. If you hear anything, I'll be staying in the next town over for a few days." He cast one last look at Austin before turning and walking out of the grocery store. The sound of his footsteps on the dirt road seemed unnaturally loud. Tessa waited until the black car disappeared over the horizon before finally exhaling the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Why did you lie?" she asked, her voice quiet but heavy with concern. Austin ran a hand through his hair, feeling his heart still racing. "Because I don't want to know who I was, Tessa," he said, looking at her with honesty. "Whatever I left behind, it can't be better than what I have here." She didn't answer right away. She just studied his face for a long moment. Then, she slowly nodded, but something in her eyes told him that she knew. Austin's past wouldn't stay buried forever, and sooner or later the truth would come knocking. Austin tried to go about his routine as usual in the days that followed, but the shadow of the man in the dark suit still lingered in his mind. He had said he didn't know the man in the photo, but he knew this wasn't over. The past he was trying to bury was getting closer and closer to resurfacing. Tessa noticed the change. Austin still helped at the grocery store, still walked the streets of St. Amelia greeting the neighbors, but something about him was different. His gaze was too watchful, his silences stretched too long, and his shoulders always seemed tense. He was waiting for something, and she feared that whatever it was would take him away from here. On a stifling afternoon, as they were organizing the store's stockroom, the bell above the door rang. Daniel was at the counter and looked up. "Tessa, Austin, you'd better come here." The seriousness in his cousin's voice made them exchange glances before walking to the front of the store. And there he was. Not the man in the suit, but someone new. A tall man, well-groomed, wearing expensive clothes and a watch that gleamed under the sunlight. His gaze was sharp, calculating, and his posture exuded confidence. "Good morning," he said, looking directly at Austin. "You don't know me, but I know you. Or rather, I know who you used to be." The silence that followed was suffocating. Tessa swallowed hard, feeling her heart race. Daniel shut the door behind them, as if instinctively wanting to keep the conversation from reaching the ears of the town. "And who did I used to be?" Austin asked, trying to stay calm but feeling the weight of those words press down on him. The man smirked. "James Adams, businessman, millionaire, missing for months, until now." Tessa felt her stomach twist. She knew. Somehow she had always known that Austin wasn't an ordinary man, but hearing the truth spoken so plainly, so definitively, made reality crash down on them like a storm. Austin remained silent, his mind spinning. He felt nothing upon hearing that name. No memories surfaced. But for some reason, hearing it made something inside him shatter. The man sighed, crossing his arms. "Marcus Roberts, your former business partner, and I'm here because I need you to come back with me. Your real life is waiting for you, James. It's time to remember who you are." Tessa looked at Austin, waiting for his reaction, but he said nothing. He just took a deep breath, knowing that no matter what choice he made, nothing would ever be the same again. Marcos's revelation hit Austin like a storm. James Adams, a millionaire, a man who controlled a massive company, and until that moment, he had no memory of ever being. But if hearing that name meant nothing to him, was he really still that person? Tessa remained silent beside him, feeling a tight knot in her chest. She feared that now that the truth was out, everything between them would change. "If you really want answers," Marcus continued, his tone almost casual, "come back with me. Your company, your money, your life. It's all waiting for you. But you need to decide now." The silence weighed heavily. What was Austin supposed to do? That name, James, belonged to a man he didn't know. But if he chose to follow Marcus, he would be abandoning everything he had built in St. Amelia. The peace, the routine, Tessa's affection. Finally, he looked at Marcus and responded, his voice calmer than anyone expected. "If I was this man, then why didn't anyone come looking for me sooner? Why didn't anyone miss me?" There was a sharp edge of doubt in his voice. "And why do you need me back so badly now?" Marcus smirked, his expression tense. "You've always been smart. The reason is simple. Without you, your company is about to fall into the wrong hands. People who care about nothing but profit. You built that empire, James. Are you really going to let it crumble?" Austin felt a tightness in his chest. Something about that explanation felt incomplete. But before he could question it further, Tessa finally spoke. "What do you really want, Austin?" Her voice was firm, but there was an underlying fragility. "Do you actually want that life back? Or do you want to stay here?" His eyes met hers, and in them was the only question that truly mattered. Tessa accepted him for who he was now. But was he ready to accept himself? Austin took a deep breath before speaking, his voice carrying a mix of conviction and uncertainty. "First, I need to be clear about something. I'm not just James anymore. I'm Austin too. I'm a mix of everything I lived before and after that accident. But before I decide, I need to know, am I married? Do I have kids?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if he had already anticipated the question. "No, you never got married. You were engaged once, but you decided not to go through with it. And you don't have any children." Austin felt a subtle relief. That had been his biggest fear, the thought of leaving behind someone who depended on him, someone waiting for his return. Knowing there was no wife or children made the decision a little easier. He continued, "What about my family? Do I have siblings? My parents? Are they still alive?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, you have a sister and a brother. Your parents are alive, and yes, they've been looking for you." Austin absorbed the information in silence. There were people waiting for him, people who loved him and thought they had lost him. A different kind of weight settled in his chest. After a brief pause, he asked, "And the accident? What do you know about how I ended up here?" Marcus adjusted his suit as if organizing his thoughts before speaking. From what we found out, you were driving at high speed and got into a serious crash. Your car was found wrecked more than 60 miles from here, but no one knows how you ended up in this village. It's like you vanished along the way." Austin closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the feeling of wandering aimlessly for so long. The cold, the hunger, the loneliness. He didn't need anyone to explain that journey to him. He had lived it. Then he turned to Tessa. His eyes met hers in a way they never had before. For the first time, he didn't just see her as the woman who had taken him in. He saw her as the woman who made his heart ache at the thought of leaving. "Marcus, I'll go with you. I want to see my family, understand my life, and see how I can help." Tessa lowered her gaze for a moment, but before she could react, he stepped forward and took her hand. "Tessa, I want you to come with me. Will you?" The silence between Tessa and Austin felt heavier than any conversation they had ever had. He watched her, waiting for an answer, but she hesitated. The big city, the life he was about to return to, it all terrified her. "Tessa," he said, his voice filled with expectation, "I want you to come with me. I want you by my side." She looked away, tightening her hands over her apron. Her heart told her to go, but her mind screamed in warning. What if he went back to being James Adams? What if his world had no place for someone like her? "I don't know, Austin." Her voice came out low. "What if, when you get your life back, you realize you don't want me by your side anymore?" He stepped closer, holding her hands firmly. "I already know who I want by my side, Tessa. My memory may not have returned, but my heart has already chosen you." She met his gaze, her eyes full of emotion, but doubt still lingered. That night, Tessa sought refuge in Grandma Alice's advice. Sitting on the porch of the simple house, her grandmother looked at her with wise, tired eyes. "My dear, some opportunities in life only come once," Grandma Alice said with a gentle smile. "And sometimes, staying where we are is the biggest risk we can take." "But what if he changes? What if that world makes him forget me?" Tessa asked, her voice trembling. "And what if he doesn't? What if he stays the man you fell in love with here? Will you forgive yourself for not going?" Daniel, who had been listening from a distance, stepped forward with a serious look. "I get it, Tessa, but men like Austin, or James, whatever, they tend to lose themselves when they go back to that world. If he can't hold on to the person he became here, he might turn into someone you won't recognize." Tessa sighed. She knew there was only one way to find out. The next morning at sunrise, she put her suitcase in the car and looked at Austin. "I'm going with you." The Addams family estate was massive, beautiful, and completely different from anything Tessa had ever seen. The reunion was emotional. His parents cried when they saw him. His sister hugged him tightly, and his brother clapped him on the shoulder, relieved. "We thought we'd never see you again," his mother said, wiping away tears. Austin looked at these people, feeling a strange mix of familiarity and distance. They loved him, but he didn't remember them. His only anchor in that room was Tessa, who remained quiet in a corner. But everyone's gaze eventually fell on her. It didn't take long for the family to realize. Austin didn't need to say a word. It was clear to them all that this woman was different from anyone who had ever been part of his life. For weeks, Austin tried to reconnect with his company, but the more time he spent there, the more he realized that world no longer belonged to him. He kept hearing people talk about how James Adams had been ruthless, arrogant, a man who lived for power and money. But he didn't recognize himself in that description. Looking at Marcus, he understood that his former business partner was still deeply tied to that world of power and ambition, a world that no longer felt like his own. That was the moment he made an unexpected but final decision. "I want to sell my shares of the company to you, Marcus," he said, looking him in the eye. Marcus raised his eyebrows. "That's insane. You built this. You're just going to throw it all away?" "I'm not throwing it away. I'm making a choice. And I choose a life where I can be who I am now, not who I was before." Marcus hesitated, but deep down he knew the man standing before him was no longer his old friend and business partner. "All right," he finally said. "If that's what you want, I'll take the deal." That night, Austin and Tessa walked along the mansion's balcony, overlooking the glowing city skyline. The wind blew softly, and he stopped to face her. "I've made my decision," he said. Tessa looked at him, tense. She didn't know what to expect. "I'm going back to St. Amelia," he continued, smiling. "I'm going to buy a farm, build a big house, and I want you and Grandma Alice to come with me. I want Daniel to come too, if he wants." Tessa felt her eyes fill with tears. Her heart pounded. "Are you sure? This world here, it doesn't mean anything to you anymore?" Austin cupped her face in his hands, looking deep into her eyes. "Maybe I'll never get all my memories back, but I know what really matters now, Tessa. You are my certainty, my peace. Wherever we are, as long as I'm with you, that's home." Tears streamed down her face, and without hesitation, Tessa threw her arms around him. "I love you, Austin," she whispered. He smiled, holding her tightly. "I love you too, Tessa, and I promise you, from this day forward, my future will always be with you." That night, under the starry sky, the man who had once been James Adams finally found something no fortune in the world could give him: love, peace, and a true new beginning. And so, Austin discovered that the true value of life wasn't in wealth, but in love and the connections he built. What did you think of this emotional story? Leave your comment below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Stories for You, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more amazing stories. See you next time.